We're with Adam Feldman. Adam is a lawyer in Phoenix, Arizona, and he's agreed to answer some questions related to white-collar crimes. With that said, Adam, let's get into our first question. I'm facing a very large series of charges that all seem to be compounding. This is all based on a single money laundering charge, but is expanded to include charges for wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and bribery. Do you have experience with this type of situation?
I do. I have a lot of experience with this type of charge and then series of charges, and it's not uncommon. A lot of times when the prosecutor receives the police reports, their job is to charge as many crimes as they can from one single incident or from one single investigation. So you start with money laundering. Money laundering is basically taking money that has been obtained illegally and doing something else with it, so as to quote unquote wash it or clean it or launder it. But what often comes from that is, how did the money come to you illegally and how is it being used? That's where all the other charges come in. So, an example is, I'm selling drugs, I get money from that, and then I'm taking that money and then I'm buying guns. Every phone call that I make in that sequence of events is use of wire communications for commission of a crime. And, depending whether you're federal or state, the title is going to be different. But every single phone call I make is one additional charge against me. Oftentimes you'll see a conspiracy charge because, I'm working with other people. The money laundering itself tends to be the least of your concerns or the least of the attorney's concerns because it carries the least severe punishment. It's the other associated charges. Sometimes they're drugs, sometimes it's money, sometimes it's guns, sometimes it's something even more serious, such as a prostitution ring or luring minors for the purpose of prostitution. The possibilities are endless, and we really do see all different types of these series of events and investigations.
Okay, next question is, do you work in federal courts? And if so, how do you structure your fees?
I do work in the federal courts throughout Arizona, and well, technically, once you're in any federal court, you can be in another federal court, but for the most part, the only federal courts I deal with are Arizona. The fee structure differs from case to case. Every case is very fact specific. One single count of money laundering, which you usually don't see, will be one price. But then when you start doing money laundering with wire communications, with RICO charges, the more complex it becomes, the different we see in the prices. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll speak with somebody over the phone, or I'll meet with an individual in jail just to get a better idea as to what we're talking about. We do a consultation in the office, and that's where we can establish the true price. And then when we have the true price, oftentimes people will need some sort of a payment plan. We can work that out. Payment plans are usually not an issue, and then we spread it out as long as we can to assist you financially.
Okay, next question is, I passed a counterfeit bill and didn't realize it. Do you have experience with counterfeit cases? I
do, and a lot of these counterfeit cases, a single bill isn't going to come back to bite you depending on how you use it. Now, the biggest thing is the mental element. There's always a mental element associated with every crime. Did you know you were committing the crime? Did you intend to commit the crime? Was this more of a reckless act? Something like that. With counterfeit bills, if this is a really bad counterfeit bill where 99% of the people are going to see this thing and say, oh my God, this is junk, this is counterfeit, you might be in some hot water there, because it's going to go to the idea of, did you know you were passing the counterfeit bill? That said, the majority of true counterfeits out there are really good, and the average person isn't going to be aware that they're in possession of it. Now, typically, counterfeits are going to come in 50s and 100s. Yes, you can see it in lower levels, but you typically see it with 50s and 100. So there are a lot of different aspects about this, but if you simply pass a single counterfeit bill, assuming that the counterfeit bill looks real, feels real, it's going to come down to what your knowledge basis was. Did you know? Should you have known? And a lot of times the answer is no. And we're very successful with these cases in demonstrating that you didn't have the mental capacity to really appreciate that what you had was counterfeit, and when you tendered it to the store or wherever you did, you believed that it was a true bill.
Okay. Next one was how are federal defenses and penalties different from the state ones?
They couldn't be further from each other. Federal courts are totally different from the state courts. Federal sentencing guidelines are totally different from the Arizona sentencing guidelines, the specific state guidelines. I could take 2 weeks teaching a course on the differences and everything like this, but basically to break it down, it goes like this. When you are in the federal court, and this is stereotyping and generalizing, those prosecutors have done a tremendous amount of work on the case already, and they have prepped their case in such a way that they are ready to go to trial the day that case is filed, and they've worked up the case. And when the charges are filed, those prosecutors are extremely familiar with the cases. So when you're dealing now with the sentencing guidelines, at that point you're dealing with upward and downward departures. You start off in a certain, I guess, ballpark of what a possible sentence could be, and there's a range on that. And then what you're trying to do within that is to say, well, here are the things that will take that sentencing and put it higher, which you don't want, such as, have you been convicted before? Were you on probation? And there are a lot of other aggravating factors that can really start increasing the possible penalty. Flip side is those are the downward departures. Mitigating factors, things that will assist you in reducing the possible punishments. And then within that, those are the federal sentencing guidelines. The state and the way that they deal with things are drastically different. They're more of that shoot first, ask questions later type of enterprise. The cops submit these charges, and I hate to say it, but the prosecutors give these charges very little thought when it comes to charging. They skim through it, try to figure out what's the highest charge they can get. They submit the charges, and lo and behold, you are stuck with these horrible charges against you. And to be honest, I think that's why the state prosecutors have such, low success rate when it comes to trials. If you were to compare the federal trials versus the state trials, state prosecutors lose a vast majority, not majority of their cases, but they lose way more cases in trial than the feds do. It's because the state, they don't work up their cases initially. So then when it comes to the sentencing guidelines, it's kind of similar, but not, in the sense that for every felony, every level felony, there's a certain sentencing range associated with that. It could be probation, it could be prison, it just depends. Aggravating factors such as the way that the crime was done, the effect on the victims, whether it was done for pecuniary gain, meaning trying to get money out of it, things like that will possibly aggravate your sentence, make it higher. But flip side is mitigating factors. Remorse, acceptance of responsibility, your age, your lack of criminal history, all of those things, they're really going to come into play. So that's my best ability to take a week's worth of discussion and condense it down into a couple minutes.
Okay, and the final question we have is, my son is overseas and facing some fairly serious penalties. Fairly serious penalties if he comes home. What are his options, and can you work with him remotely?
Options and working remotely. I can work remotely, but this is typically what we see. That there's just not that much that I can do on the case until the person comes back to the United States. I can certainly do investigations. I can hire an investigator. I can send out the investigator. I can investigate the case myself. So there's a certain amount of legwork that can be done. But outside of just learning the ins and outs of the case and doing our own workup, when it comes to dealing with the prosecutor and then obviously dealing with the courts, the case has to be active. If you're out of state, if you're out of country and you're on some sort of warrant status, it's as if the case no longer exists in the eyes of the court. So I can't submit motions on your behalf. I can't do much to assist you other than saying, hey, judge, we want to quash the bench warrant, or we want to initiate proceedings. So every once in a while, depending on the severity of the case, the complexity of the case, the judges will agree with my motion to quash the bench warrant. So the idea is that you can come to court at a scheduled date in the future, and you no longer run the risk of getting picked up at customs or arrested on your way to court. However, sometimes the court's going to say this guy's been on bench warrant status for 10 years. These crimes are really serious. We're not going to do anything other than let him self-surrender. When he surrenders to the county jail, then we'll initiate the proceedings. Either way, at that point, by having an attorney on board, it really helps speed things up and it helps protect the client. So that's the best I can do with that question. I hope it answers the question.
Okay, excellent. If you have any other questions for Adam, all you need to do is post them in the comments section below. He's agreed to get back to you with a response. Obviously, you can reach out to his firm directly. Thanks for your time, Adam.
Thanks, Ryan. And as the listener, you can see that a lot of these questions that you're asking, they're very fact specific. So the best way for me to give you more concrete answers is just to call me at 602-540-7887. We'll have an ability to really go over the true facts of the case, and I can let you know much more about how I can work the case up, the prices, if the person's out of state, out of the country, how we can get him or her back safely and without being arrested by the police. So feel free to give me a call at your earliest convenience. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Adam.